Okay, so it's just 11:30 for me, which is the time for this live speaker series to get started. So I'm going to kick us off, and as people kind of filter in, they'll be here for the start of Lorraine's presentation. So thanks everyone for being here for our live speaker series today with Lorraine Lee from Prezi. We're talking about video and presentation tips for an all-remote work environment. And I'm really excited to have Lorraine here. I was just chatting with her about how this is our first live speaker series that the L&D is hosting in 2022. And it's part of a 4-part series that's going to be focused on all remote communication. So we're working on getting 1 speaker per month for the next 4 months. And each speaker will kind of talk about a different aspect of remote communication and tools and strategies you can use to improve that in your role at GitLab, whatever team you're on. And like I said, today we're going to talk about video and presentation skills. I'm really excited for this discussion because I think that at GitLab we have some really unique pieces about when we do and when we don't present. And regardless of if you feel like you present or like do presentations in your role, I think we all play a role in recording and sharing really important videos, if not only internally, but also externally. And so I think that this presentation is going to be really helpful for everyone as it applies to strategies that you can use when you're making live presentations to people who are internal or external to the company, but also just when you're recording video that you want to share and look nice. So really looking forward to the conversation. I'm just going to go over the structure of these calls really quickly and then pass it over to Lorraine. So if you haven't been on a live speaker series before, we're going to spend about the first 25 minutes or so with Lorraine giving our presentation. And then for the rest of the call, when the presentation is over, we'll open it up as like an AMA Q&A format. So if you have questions now, or if questions come up during the presentation, you can just add them to the meeting agenda, which I'll drop in the chat in case you don't have it open. And we'll go through them. And if we don't get through them all, we will follow up with them asynchronously. I think that's all. If you have any questions about the structure or anything, feel free to ask it now or send it in the chat. And otherwise, I'm going to pass it over to Lorraine for her to introduce herself and to kick off the presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Samantha, and hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. I'm so excited to be here. This is my first keynote of the year, so can't think of a more perfect place than to give it at GitLab. So as Samantha mentioned, my name is Lorraine Lee, and I am the head of editorial at Prezi, a virtual presentation and collaboration software that is being used by the majority of the Fortune 1000 to make their meetings better. Each week, my team curates and creates dozens of videos and virtual presentations, so we've developed a pretty good sense for what works well and what doesn't work so well when it comes to video. We're also a distributed virtual first team, so I've been able to put many of these lessons into practice, and in the next 20-25 minutes or so, I'll be sharing some of my favorite tips and tricks to beat video fatigue and make sure that you are standing out with your async presentations. And for those who stay through to the end, I have a little gift for all of you as well that you can look forward to. Now, before I dive in, if you haven't done so already, I recommend that you please full screen my video to make sure that the content is as clear and crisp as possible. 5 years ago, I had flown from San Francisco to New York, and I was getting ready to enter the Empire State Building. I was so incredibly nervous. My palms were extremely sweaty. My body was cold, yet somehow hot at the same time. I was a nervous wreck. But I somehow gathered my courage together, and I stepped onto the elevator to head to the video studio on the 25th floor. I was getting ready for my first ever on-camera interview as an editor at LinkedIn. Now, being on video, doing video interviews, those were not part of my job description, but I knew even back then that video was becoming really important to the business world, and I wanted to make sure that I was prepared. So here I was in New York, completely out of my element. I had scheduled 4 interviews across 4 days with CEOs, founders, and directors. And before those interviews, I spent hours researching them and researching their company so that I could feel more prepared and a little less nervous. My first interview here was with the CEO of the Clinton Health Matters Initiative, and when it was done, I cannot tell you how relieved I felt. I pushed forward and I finished the other 3 interviews, still completely freaking out inside, but I made it. During those years at LinkedIn, I ended up gaining enough confidence to start my own video series, and I had the chance to interview powerhouse women across industries. For my very last LinkedIn interview here, I was finally feeling more comfortable, and I decided to step it up a notch and try my first live interview. And even though I was still somewhat nervous, you can see that I'm smiling and enjoying myself more. That live interview then gave me the confidence to step onto a tennis court in Berkeley, California, just a few weeks later for my first paid speaking gig as the on-court announcer for a professional men's tennis tournament. And this opportunity came about because the organizer there had seen all my videos on LinkedIn and he reached out. Fast forward a few more years, and now I get to talk about video and share best practices with amazing companies like GitLab. And I hope that story highlighted that even though being on video can be nerve-wracking or uncomfortable at times, whether it be on camera or maybe on a webcam, it is very, very possible for all of us to learn how to get more comfortable and stand out on video so that we are creating great videos that impress and engage our teammates, our customers, and our partners. So in today's session, we'll cover how you can come across more confident and competent on video and keep your audience engaged. And then I'll share some best practices for being on video. As I mentioned before, my name is Lorraine Lee, and I'm the head of editorial at Prezi. Before Prezi, I was an editor at LinkedIn for 6 years, where I created and hosted its Female Founders video series, and I was part of the team that launched LinkedIn's first ever video product all the way back in 2016. So I've been around video for quite a few years now. Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, and I encourage you all during this session to feel free to take screenshots and hopefully with my eyes open and you're sharing them on LinkedIn afterwards. I would love to engage with you on that platform. So now that we've all been introduced, let's dive in. I want to start off by normalizing again that being nervous or uncomfortable on video is completely natural, especially in our virtual setup with all of these additional factors that we have to deal with. I mentioned that I've done quite a few video interviews before. I still get nervous on camera. At Prezi, I work with a lot of keynote speakers and they get nervous sometimes too. And for many of them, this is their full-time job, if not a big part of their job. So totally natural. And today we'll be talking about techniques to quiet those nerves, as well as ways to boost your confidence so that instead of feeling like this here, you feel more like this. Ready and excited to create amazing virtual presentations and videos that will have you feeling really proud of yourself and really energized after seeing your team members and customer reactions. But first, before we can learn how to stand out on video, we need to acknowledge the reality of our day-to-day. We have all of these competing priorities and distractions that are making it even harder to grab and keep people's attention. This isn't much of a surprise when we see things like this on a daily basis, aka the before. Your audience's world is noisy. They are getting constantly bombarded with messages and content, and screen sharing is just not cutting it anymore as a way to be remembered or to stand out. And we can't really blame video fatigue because there are so many videos and other types of video content holding our attention. If you take a moment to reflect on how much video content you're watching on a daily basis, I know my number is embarrassingly high up there, you will realize that video fatigue isn't actually the issue. We are just bored with the screen shares and bulleted slides and tired of seeing the same types of presentations over and over and over again. We can't settle for the status quo anymore. The future of video and video meetings is really now about creating experiences where everyone is a participant and everyone can contribute in creative ways beyond the screen share, the hand raise, and the chat box. So how do we move away from the status quo? This leads us into the first section of my presentation, where I'll talk about 3 ways to boost your confidence and appear more competent on video, and then 3 ways to keep your audience engaged. One of the best ways to grow your confidence is to know that you're making a good impression on camera. There are, of course, the typical suggestions for growing your confidence, like practice a lot, and maybe you need to write out a script and dress to impress, which are all very legitimate pieces of advice. But I want to talk about the less obvious ways to gain confidence that will be particularly helpful based on our virtual setups. So I'll share my favorite 3 tips first, and then keep in mind that many of the other tips that I'm sharing throughout this presentation will also apply to this. So the first way to increase your confidence, believe it or not, is through great lighting. So lighting is very, very easy to fix, but for whatever reason, it's an afterthought for a lot of people. So it may not seem obvious at first, I know it wasn't for me, but lighting does have a psychological effect on you. I think I can safely say that most of us want to look good and professional on camera, at least with the upper half of our bodies, right? But when we look like this, it's distracting, it's unclear, and it doesn't really leave the other side with the best impression. And of course, you as a presenter probably don't feel great about how you're coming across either. So this is how we fix that. You'll want to make sure that you have a light source in front of you facing your face. Make sure that it's never facing your back, coming from behind, or else that's going to cause you to be backlit and look like you're in a true crime documentary. I'm sure some of us, or many of us, have experienced that on calls already. And really the ideal situation is you actually have a window in front of you so that you're getting natural light, again, coming in from the front, facing your face. If you still need an extra boost, I would recommend purchasing a ring light or 2. I actually have 2 on both sides of my desk right now, as well as a soft box in front of me. Once you have your lighting ready to go, the next thing that you'll want to focus on is your visuals. So many of us have probably heard various stats talking about how impactful visuals are. For example, 90% of the information processed by the brain is visual, or 80% of people remember what they see versus what they hear and read, and 65% of people identify as visual learners. Now, if you've ever told a story where everyone was attentive and really excited about what you had to say next, you'll know what sort of confidence boost that gives you. The same goes with your presentation. If you're using visuals well, your viewers are going to be more tuned in and actually retain what you're telling them, which is going to make you feel more confident about what you're sharing. Visuals can also be helpful in other ways when it comes to confidence building. So I don't know about all of you, but for me, one of the scariest things about presenting is feeling like everyone is staring at me, judging my every word. But I have found that adding visuals helps me relax more as a presenter because they help balance out the audience's attention between me and my content. Now, the last way that visuals give me confidence is through what I like to call the teacher effect. When you can use visuals creatively and walk through content similar to how a teacher might at the front of the classroom, there's an added level of authority that leads to confidence. Oops. The next tip I have for you is to curate your environment. Having a well thought out, curated environment is going to give a more professional look and feel to your presentation. And similar to lighting, if you look more professional, you're just going to feel better about how you're coming off. Now, before I moved into this apartment here, I was in a studio apartment. My bed was literally right behind my desk, pushed up against it. I always felt very self-conscious about it, wondering on calls, were people paying attention to me? Were they getting distracted by my background? Now, spacing issues like these, they can't always be fixed, but there are hacks that you can use to try to make your background look more professional. So you can use a room divider, for example. I think I saw someone on the call have one, which is great. I had a coworker who hung up a curtain behind him, which I thought was very creative. So there are ways that you can at least create a professional background, even if you're hacking some things a little bit. Now, when you're starting off, a clean background like Jessica is using here usually works best so that you and your content don't get lost. And again, so people don't get distracted by what's going on behind you. But once you get more comfortable with your background, you can start getting really creative with it. So if there are any NPR fans in the audience, you might recognize Guy Raz here. You can see that he chose an outdoor setting for his background. It looks really cool, and he's also getting the natural light that I mentioned earlier. Or I love this example by Ted. She only had 2 plants behind her, but she had all of this natural light, and the colors of the plants really popped against the white. So I thought it was such a beautiful setup, and she looked so professional, but also really approachable. So this is actually one of my favorite setups that I've seen so far. Now, in my past presentations, I actually called this section curating your background. But I think with all the advances that we're seeing in tech and how people are up-leveling their video calls, curating your environment is a more accurate description of what someone needs to do to really stand out and impress. And you're actually the first audience seeing this new tip. So at Prezi, we're seeing a lot of companies and customers creating a true virtual experience on their video that contributes to their overall presence and professionalism. So here's an example showing how you can have both a great background and your video becomes even more impressive once you add a simple name tag and visual elements to the foreground of the screen. And the visuals here ties into what I mentioned before about the impact of visuals, but you can see it's really not just about the background, it's now the background and the foreground and the entire experience and environment you're creating in your virtual world. So those are our 3 tips for appearing more confident and competent on video. Let's go into our first recap. To gain more confidence, you'll want to adjust your lighting, use visuals, and curate your environment. Next up, let's talk about 3 ways that you can keep your audience engaged. Like I showed earlier, many of us continue to see presentations where the presenter is screen sharing, they're sitting on a slide for 10 minutes, and your response is either this or this, when it should really look more like this. So how do we make sure that we are standing out and the audience isn't tuning out? One way we can do that is with the Think, Do, Feel matrix. Now, the Think, Do matrix was created by author and professor Andrew Abella. And what this matrix does is it helps you map out how your audience thinks and what they're currently doing. And then it helps you decide how you want both of these things to change after they see your presentation. Now, this Think Do matrix has since been modified by Prezi's Spencer Waldron to become the Think Do Feel matrix, because emotion is going to be so important in connecting with your teammates and clients and persuading them to take action. And if we're really honest with ourselves, I think emotions are what typically drive big decisions, and then facts and logic come in to fill in the gaps afterwards. So this feel column is key. Now, these days, we're all so busy that we forget to focus on customization or making things specific based on who we're talking to. So again, if you can fill this out, you're going to be miles ahead of your counterparts. And if you don't have the answers, this is a great time to ask questions so that you can fill in the gaps. So I encourage you all to take a stab at filling this out before your next call. This is what mine looked like for this particular presentation. So this matrix is going to definitely help you create a more memorable presentation because you're going to have a better understanding of who your audience is and what you want them to walk away with, which is going to help you build the right content for them. Once you're done filling this out, the next thing you'll want to do is add movement to your presentation. So adding movement is going to spike your viewers' attention by boosting dopamine in the brain. And I can't promise you that your next video or virtual presentation is going to be as exciting as a car chase, but you can definitely get closer to it if you start adding some movement. So let's take a moment here to really confirm our hypothesis about the impact of movement with our first group activity. So if you could please let me know in the chat, for the last 15 seconds or so, were you primarily watching the video? Were you of the car chase? Were you looking at the picture of the car chase? Or were you looking at me? No wrong answer. I won't be offended if you weren't looking at me, but let me go over to the chat here. Samantha says video, Adrian video. A lot of video, car chase plus emails. Okay, appreciate the honesty. Rebecca photo, Sophie video. Okay, wonderful. Looks like most of you are saying video. Yeah, feel free to keep typing. I'll look at the chat afterwards. But yeah, so you're all seeing firsthand just how powerful movement can be in drawing attention. Now, I like to recommend at least 2 slides or movements per minute in a virtual setting. And they don't have to be big movements at all. So for example, you can do fun tricks like this to keep your audience engaged. And when you do creative movements like this, you also have that added benefit of creating novelty, something our brains weren't expecting. So that, brains love that. And so it leads us to pay even closer attention to what we're watching. So now that we have movement down, let's talk about our last tip for keeping engagement, power words. What are power words? Power words are words that trigger an emotional or psychological reaction when you hear them. And it can either be in a positive way or a negative way. So this is an example of what we hear a lot in presentations. Something like, this new data shows that we're on track. Okay, great. It explains what's happening, but there are ways that we can improve this. This exciting data shows that we are gaining command of the market. Words matter, and power words can act as a dopamine hit to the brain. And when you use power words, you're waking people up out of autopilot and getting their attention. So we're going to jump into another group activity here. So this is a list of just a few power words. There are hundreds out there that you can use in your next video or presentation. So from this list, choose the one that you like the most and one that you'll try to incorporate in a future video, or feel free to come up with a new one entirely. And then please share it in the chat with us. So I'm going back to the chat here. Okay, Balti likes accelerate, Samantha dream. Mikhail BS bingo. Okay, some people like dream. Okay, accelerate, maximize. Anyone else want to chime in? Or come up with their own word? No, all right, well, I'll give you some time to think about it. There's a lot of words to choose from. Collaborate, okay, wonderful, thank you, Simon. So yeah, keep typing in the chat. I want to see what you come up with here. So we have our 3 tips for engagement now. Let's do another recap. To keep your audience engaged with your videos, you'll want to use the think, do, feel matrix, add movements, and include power words. Now that you all have your new tips for gaining confidence and engaging your audience, you are well on your way to shining on the virtual stage. So let's switch gears now to talk about another crucial element to virtual presenting, which is our actual video presence. So in this section, I'm going to share 3 tips around how to better connect with the person on the other side of the video, and then 3 tips for giving your presentation additional energy. And Samantha mentioned to me that most of your presentations are done recorded. That's great. These tips are going to work for both recorded or live videos. The first tip to help you connect with your audience over video is to focus on your framing. So this is what I often see when people are on video. With this angle, I get to see up your nose, under your chin, and it's great to see your face, and kudos for turning on your camera, but this is a bit too close and frankly can actually be uncomfortable to the other side. And there's a scientific reason for this. So people skills expert Vanessa Van Edwards says that this is because this feeling of being too close on camera replicates what we might feel in person when someone gets in our personal space. Our brain's reaction is to think that this person might harm us, and it activates our amygdala, which processes fear. And fear is not a feeling that we want to be giving others on a video call. Now, being this close is also an issue because it makes it harder for the other side to stay engaged when they're talking to just a floating head with no movement or space to give their eyes a break, like we have in in-person interactions where you might maybe wave to a coworker walking by, look down at your notes, or just have that a more familiar in-person interaction where you can see your body language and all of that. So your video should really ideally show your shoulders and a bit of your torso with a little bit of space at the top of your head. Now, when you do this, you are no longer just a floating head, and the person on the other side can feel more like you're having that in-person conversation when they can see your body movement and your hand gestures, again, which I'll touch on a little bit more later. So let's do another quick group activity here to check whether we have the right distance from the camera. So for those who have their videos on, if you wouldn't mind sticking out your arm, and you'll want about an arm's length of distance from you and the camera. So if you have less than an arm's length of distance, you're likely way too close. So again, just make whatever adjustments you need so that you have enough space so you can see this part of your body. And then also you want it at the right height as well. So you can use a laptop stand, use books, leftover delivery boxes, doesn't need to be anything fancy, and just make sure that you're propping up your camera the right way. Looks like some people are making adjustments, which is great. Once you have your proper framing ready to go, you can then start thinking about eye contact. Eye contact is going to be really important to make your audience feel like you are connecting with them, but speaking from personal experience, it is one of the more difficult things to do. So really, you should always aim to be looking at the camera or right below it. This is really hard to do though, because it's human nature to want to look at ourselves to make sure that we look okay, or maybe to see, how our face looks responding to something. But as best as you can, fight this urge. And I have found that turning off self-view helps a lot with this. It's a little disconcerting not seeing your video on the screen at first, but it helps me focus so much more. Now, I also see a lot of presentations and even video calls where people are kind of looking sideways at their content like this. Sometimes they're looking at an entirely different monitor when they talk to you or when they present, and they look really distracted or disengaged. And if you're feeling like the presenter feels like that, that of course, why should you be paying attention? You're going to feel that way too. So as best as you can, again, look right at the camera or right below it, depending on what your setup is, so that the person on the other side feels like you're looking at them. Now, this last tip for connecting with your audience is to smile. Smiling is one of those things that presenters often forget to do, but it can have a really big impact on how your audience responds to you. When you get ready to make a presentation or to record yourself on video, you may experience any one of these super fun emotions as nerves and anxiety build up. For my first keynotes, I was personally these two here. Now, if I had let those expressions be the main ones that came across in my presentation, the audience probably would not really have enjoyed it very much. Instead, when we smile, the audience sees that we're enjoying ourselves and that we are excited about what we're talking about, and it encourages them to feel the same. You've probably heard that a smile is contagious, and it definitely applies to video and virtual presenting as well. A smile is going to lift your mood and the mood of those around you. Now, remembering to smile took me a bit of time and practice just because I was so nervous to start. But once I got more comfortable, it did really make a big difference in how my audience perceived me. And I still remember the first presentation where someone even commented on how much they liked that I was smiling. So it does help. Now that we have all our smiles on, let's bring those into the next recap. You're going to want to make sure you have the right framing, that you are using eye contact, and that you are smiling. Next, let's talk about how to insert some energy into your presentation, which is especially important over video as we have this additional barrier of the screen that we have to break through. The first thing that you'll want to do is to stand up or at least sit up with good posture. Standing up is going to give your presentation a whole different energy. So this video here is of keynote speaker Brian Fanzo, and you can see when he's standing, even though the video is silent, there is so much more energy and it just feels really dynamic. You can see he's able to use his space more effectively when he interacts with his visuals. And as a viewer, it's a lot more interesting to watch than if you were just sitting down kind of passively in his chair. Now, if you can't stand or you don't want to, make sure that you are sitting up with straight posture and not relaxed and slumped. And a good tip for this is if you're sitting, you choose to sit, scoot up so that you're sitting on the front half of your chair. And this way you're not tempted to lean back and relax. One thing to watch out for when you stand is to make sure not to rock back and forth. That's something I've definitely done before when I've been nervous. So if you need to, record yourself practicing so you can see how you look. And if you decide to sit down, the equivalent of this would be swiveling in your chair from side to side. The next tip I want to share with you is to project your voice. So this is a nice trick that I learned from my colleague Spencer, who I mentioned earlier. Raising your voice 20 to 25% louder than you might normally speak helps you eliminate filler words that might otherwise creep in and make you seem unsure of yourself. By raising your voice, you get rid of those filler words by becoming a lot more intentional about what you want to say. If you listen to yourself speaking later today, you'll notice that filler words usually sneak in when we're speaking in a more relaxed way. The last tip to round out this section will be to use hand gestures. If you are not using your hands on video, you're missing out on a big opportunity. Research has shown that movements like open palms and mirroring the other person's body language makes you seem more personable, and the other side thinks of you as warmer and more energetic. So here's a video by Vanessa Van Edwards. I mentioned her earlier when I talked about the amygdala. She does a really great job using hand gestures, and she's actually talking about them in this video here. So her team did a really interesting analysis of popular TED Talks by views, and they found that the most viral videos had speakers who used an average of 465 hand gestures, while the least popular TED Talks used 272. So that's nearly 50% less, a huge drop. So I think this data clearly shows how important hand gestures are, but they aren't always the most natural thing on video when our hands are maybe resting on our keyboards or our mouse. So I'd recommend starting off with simple ones. You can use basic gestures like counting things off, one of my favorites. If you're talking about something small, you can use a pinch gesture, or widen your hands if you're talking about something big. And if all that still feels kind of weird to you, no problem. I like to recommend just waving at the start and at the end of the meeting. I know some people, make fun of, of waving, but I think it's a really great way to get your hands on camera. You're showing your palm, and it's just, getting you comfortable with that movement. Let's move on to our next recap. To add energy, make sure to stand up, project your voice, and use hand gestures. All right, so we've covered a lot in the last 20 minutes or so. Let's recap once more to make sure everything really sticks, and then maybe you'll be reminded of another additional tip that you can try later today. So we talked about how to boost confidence and the need to focus on your lighting, your visuals, and your environment, as well as how to stand out using the think, do, feel matrix, movement, and power words. And then we talked about best practices for video meetings and async video and how to connect over video using framing, eye contact, and smiling, as well as how to add energy into your presentations by standing up, projecting your voice, and using hand gestures. So I think all of us, especially a remote company like GitLab, can agree that video is here to stay. So I'd love to hear from all of you in the chat, which one or two, or hopefully more tips do you plan on trying in your next video call or your next async video? Let me move back to the chat here. Sophia says standing up, Adrian, more hand gestures, Samantha speaking louder to remove filler words. Another person, Joanna, projecting your voice as well. Sophie, better lighting and posture. Okay, wonderful. We'll keep typing away. I definitely want to look at all of this afterwards. It's helpful for me to see what people find most valuable. So to thank you all for attending, I have two gifts for you today. First is a free 1-month premium upgrade to Prezi Video. Samantha and I were talking about this earlier. There's also a free version that you can just start using right away if you'd like. But this way, if you fill out this form, you can take advantage of all of the features, one of which is recording in HD. The second is a GitLab branded presentation that you can use. So if you follow this link here, you can make a copy of the presentation once you've created your Prezi account, and there's a name tag there that you can use, as well as actual additional slides if you want to build something out. And lastly, I just started a newsletter where I share actionable tips around video and presentations, virtual and hybrid meetings, as well as LinkedIn to create engagement in virtual and hybrid offices. So would love for you to subscribe if it sounds like something interesting to you. And lastly, before we dive into the Q&A, sorry, I know we're a little bit over time, would love to get all of your feedback. Just, it's going to take a minute or less, just really helpful for me to know what you found valuable, what I can do differently next time for future speaking engagements. And with that, I will turn it back over to Samantha for a Q&A.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. This was so fun and like so many cool ideas. And it's funny, as you were talking, I was trying to look up some of them in our handbook to like add links. And I think there's a lot of really great strategies that you shared that aren't in our handbook. And so I have some work to do after this call to add it, because I think, yeah, you just shared a lot of really awesome tips that I know I'm going to use and hope others do too.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. So we have a little over 10 minutes or so for a Q&A. So if anyone has any questions for Lorraine, feel free to add them to the doc. There's 2 in there. We'll get started and just keep adding them if you have any that you want to talk about. The first one's from Alex, and it said async, but now it doesn't. So maybe Alex is here and wants to work.
I'm here.
Oh, cool.
Hey.
Yeah,
Alex.
Alex.
Hey, Lorraine. My question is, I missed part of your presentation, but I've seen bits of it before, and I think that Prezi would be really powerful for us at GitLab, especially in sales. Obviously, that's my bias, but was wondering how you have helped other technology companies set up Prezi in such a way that sales teams can take advantage of it for executive calls without kind of making it really turn into a large time suck where it takes a lot of AE time away from selling to set everything up in the videos and the links and everything.
Yeah, such a great question. So I'm actually going to close my presentation here. I'm going to share my screen if that's all right, Samantha. See. Is this right? Okay. Can everyone see my Prezi Video app here? Okay, seeing some nods.
Yep,
so my coworker, Edward, created this GitLab template, actually. So this is what we call the quick record template. So I think, Alex, to your point, a lot of people have it in their heads that to create something with Prezi, it takes a lot of time, and we don't have that time always. So if your team were to get on Prezi, we have these templates where literally right here, get my keyboard, you can type in real time. And so this is a really nice way to, again, have those added visuals on the call, without taking up a lot of time. You can have images here. You can, zoom in or leave it here, like point to things, engage. So that's one way that you can do this. And this is also something I like to use just on calls. You can add stickers and GIFs and things to really like, oh, I like your idea, I'll put a thumbs up there. Another thing that you can do is that you can import PowerPoints. So I'm sure all of you probably have, I think Samantha mentioned Google Slides. So when you import a PowerPoint, the slide sits right here. And again, you can zoom in and out. So that's also a very easy way to get started quickly. And then one of our salespeople at Prezi mentioned that what she sees at a lot of companies is that the marketing or brand team will create a Prezi presentation that's about 80 to 90% complete, and the sales team will just go in afterwards and kind of update what they need to for that added layer of customization. And that's also really helpful to just keep consistent on branding with any of the content that people are using. So yeah, I would say that those are the main ways to kind of get up and running quickly without spending too much time to build something new out.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have the next question, and I was wondering, a lot of the video that I record is usually pretty short video, like maybe I try to keep it short, at least like maybe 2 minutes. And I'm wondering, like, what of the tips that you shared are the most important to include on a really short recording? And then, like, is there a balance to strike between like the length of your recording and how long you can keep viewers attentive?
I don't have a super, specific recommendation on length. I know a lot of people want to know what the magic amount of time is, but I think it really depends on your audience and the content. And I think if you're able to incorporate some of those tips that I shared, you can go longer because it's just going to be more interesting to watch. I think for a shorter video, I would say I like if you can use visuals, I think, because people are going to be just in general watching videos quickly. And so when you can have those visual moments where people, know where to stop or maybe to pay extra attention to, I think that's super helpful personally. And then I think I saw you comment earlier, like the movement, I think is also really beneficial as well. But I really do think, the best practices for short and long videos, like they're pretty similar and basically the same because it's just about engaging the audience.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
This next question in the doc is from Rebecca, who I think is on the call. So I'll pass it to her to verbalize.
Okay.
Thanks, Samantha. Hi, Lorraine. Amazing presentation. Thank you so much. So my question is, do you have any recommendations on when to make and put effort into making this type of presentation or adding these types of visual cues versus just a call? I would say specifically, I feel like I missed a moment to actually present a bit more in a meeting most recently when it was just a call, but I feel like my ideas would have been better communicated if I added a presentation and I just didn't jump at that opportunity.
Yeah, I think that quick record option that I showed you earlier is very helpful. Like I've been in a similar situation and you have something you want to say, but you don't have a full, presentation planned out, but to be able to just add quick notes onto the screen about, points you want to make or observations you made, I think that's really helpful. And you can do that very quickly on the go.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like
I think I'm next.
Okay, cool. Go ahead.
I want to ask you, Lorraine, thanks for the great presentation, about the position of the camera, because my camera is like a little bit higher than my head, and I wonder if it makes me like in the worst position because people may like look down on me. I was like thinking about it before, and now all your remarks about framing made me think about it again.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. Ideally, you want it to be just face on like that, and there is that psychological thing where if the camera is above you, it is like people are looking down on you. So I would try to, if you can, just adjust it a little bit. It's pretty close. I can see you're almost there straight on. So I would recommend, yeah, changing that.
So much.
Justin, looks like you have the next question.
I was just wondering if you had any suggestions on pre-presentation rituals to help calm the nerves, breathing deep breaths 5 times or something like that?
Yeah, good question. A few things. So I don't do this as often anymore, but I used to play pump up music. So you have a pump up song that does help kind of, shake out that loose energy. If it's a call first thing in the morning, like this one was for me, I do some lip trills, I take voice lessons. So, but you can find scales online, and just to warm up the voice, I think is helpful. And then, common advice, but practice a lot. And the more you practice, the more confident you'll be. I think, at least 10 times before a presentation, if you can. I've actually heard as well, practice 1 hour for every 1 minute of presentation to really master it. So 20-minute presentation, 20 hours of practice. We don't all have that time, so I'd say 10 times minimum if you can.
That's a lot of practice.
It is, yeah.
Adrian, you're next.
Sure. So I'm curious about how you handle background noise. I don't know if people can hear it. It's just kind of dim, but I have someone cutting their grass next door right now. And when you're on a call, or if you're giving a presentation that starts in the middle, like, what are some tips? I'm sure going to a quiet space is part of it, but I can't like really move. So I'm just curious what your tips might be about how to handle it.
Yeah, such a good question. So I use a software called CRISP, starts with a K, KRISP. Amazing for cutting out background noise. Similar to you, I would have my air purifier get very aggressive during calls, and people would be like, is someone vacuuming there? So CRISP is really helpful for that, and it gets rid of most of my noise. I have an external mic, so putting a towel underneath to absorb some of that noise is helpful. If you have sound panels or willing to invest in them and kind of placing them around windows or places where there might be gaps, I think could be helpful as well. But depends if you want to, stick those up on your wall.
I added to the agenda too, in Zoom, there's a setting that you can reduce background noise. I don't really know how well it works, but
Good to, just set it up at least.
yeah. Cool. And we have one more question from Bowdy. Are you on the call?
Yes, I'm here. Microphone's helpful. But so mine is, hey, Prezi is going to be, I think, new to a lot of us if we start leveraging, but it's really nice to see the ability to put like the content next to you, because it's very different experience than our normal slides, switch over to person, whatever else it is. And while many folks do a lot of recording, most of my calls are meetings where I work on our channels, so working with our partners to show them something which might still be a slide. So the question is, if I'm using Prezi, which looks pretty cool for that perspective, and I want to record it so that I can share it in the future, and we use Zoom, right? And obviously it looks like it embeds. What's the best practice for the actual recording, to record with Prezi or to record with Zoom?
So if it's a live call, you would record with Zoom, but you can also record in the Prezi app. For example, if you're doing an async video and you want to send it to someone later, I think that would work. I think in general, for recordings, if you can record in the native app, if you not Zoom, because Zoom's, the quality kind of decreases a little bit, as much as you can record in Prezi video, that would be helpful.
So so for those of us who also then would create videos like the 2-minute ones that Samantha wants to do, better to do that part. That's best practices within Prezi.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
You
Cool.
don't have to log onto a Zoom call. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for the question.
This was awesome. I feel like this is the most like rapid fire Q&A we've ever had on a live speaker series. And I'm really glad that we got to all of them.
Yeah.
We just have 2 minutes left. So is there anybody else who has a quick question that they want to ask? Usually I wouldn't ask, but I feel like we can actually do it because of our speed right now. So
I'll just add, I'm more introverted, so sometimes it takes me a while to, think of what questions I want to ask. You can just add me on LinkedIn if anything comes up later, and feel free to ask me there.
Yeah, thanks, Lorraine.
Yeah,
this was a fantastic presentation. I really enjoyed listening to you and learning from you. And thank you so much for taking time to talk with our team today. And thanks to everyone who made time to be here.
Yeah, thank you for the great questions, everyone. It was nice meeting you.
Yeah. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.
Thanks.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.